The azure room shimmered like a world untouched by worry. Crystal fixtures glittered overhead, casting soft reflections across polished stone floors. Every table carried the low murmur of people who lived their entire lives above consequence. High-powered executives, hedge fund titans, and the billionaire who ruled the corner booth without saying a word. He sat there in a perfectly tailored suit, posture relaxed, but presence unmistakable. The kind of man whose signature could shift markets. The kind of man no one interrupted. Servers glided around him with the precision of a place trained to treat wealth like royalty. Yet one young waitress kept stealing glances, each look longer, heavier, more urgent. She'd seen it by accident. A sleeve pushed slightly up, a glimpse of ink, a compass-shaped tattoo marked with a date. Not a common design, not a random symbol. Not to her. Her pulse rattled in her ears as she stepped closer, tray tucked against trembling hands. Every instinct told her to walk away, to forget what she'd seen. But this wasn't something she could ignore. Not tonight. Not ever. The billionaire didn't bother lifting his gaze when she reached his table. He simply continued reviewing documents worth more than her annual income. She tried once. Her voice nearly broke. She tried again. This time he looked up, expression cool, eyes emotionless, waiting for her to speak. What she said next made his fingers freeze midair. "Sir, I'm sorry, but your tattoo. My mother has the exact same one. Same design, same date." And in an instant, the room stopped breathing. Before we continue, take a second to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the stories grow, and I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments so I can welcome you properly. Now, here's where everything begins to fall apart. The alarm tore through the darkness at 4:30 a.m., slicing into Sophie's dreams with the same cold precision it had for the past 3 years. Her one-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights was still wrapped in shadows, the winter chill clinging to the cracked walls. She lay still for a second, fighting the instinct to stay in bed, to buy herself one more hour of sleep her body desperately needed. But life had never given Sophie the luxury of choosing rest. Her feet hit the worn linoleum floor, and the cold bit at her skin. She tied her hair into a rough bun, splashed water on her face, and glanced at the small mirror, the one that always reminded her she was 28, but aging twice as fast. Beneath her eyes, faint purple crescents betrayed her exhaustion. Still, she forced a thin smile. Another day, another shift, another battle she didn't have time to lose. The apartment was quiet, except for the low hum of the radiator struggling to stay alive. She tiptoed into the living room, where her mother, Elena, slept on the reclining chair positioned near the window for better airflow. In the dim light, her mother looked smaller, fragile. The illness, still unnamed, still aggressively draining, had stripped away the once fierce energy Elena was known for. Every day, Sophie feared waking up to her not breathing. She placed a gentle hand on her mother's shoulder. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm heading out." Elena's eyes flickered open, warm but clouded. "Did you sleep at all?" her mother asked, voice barely a breath. "Here and there," Sophie lied, adjusting the blanket around her. "I'll be back before you know it." Before leaving, she pulled the blanket's edge farther up, and that's when her eyes caught it again. The tattoo on her mother's left shoulder blade. A small, intricate pattern. A ring of geometric lines surrounding a symbol Sophie didn't recognize. Sophie had seen it many times, but Elena always brushed it off whenever she asked about it. A mistake from her youth, something she regretted, something not important anymore. But Sophie never believed that. The lines were too deliberate, too artistic, too meaningful for a random tattoo. Still, today wasn't the day to press for answers. The city greeted her with the sharp bite of dawn air. Washington Heights was slowly stirring awake. Delivery trucks, flickering bodega lights, the rumble of the subway below. Sophie wrapped her coat tighter as she descended the stairs and began the long commute to her first shift. She worked double shifts so often that the security guards at both workplaces joked she lived there. By 6 a.m., she was clocked in at the upscale Midtown cafe where billionaires casually ordered $18 coffees like they were buying gum. The polished marble counters, the scent of roasted espresso, the soft jazz humming through the speakers, it all felt like a different world, one Sophie could only observe from the outside. While grinding beans and wiping counters, she watched the parade of millionaires and influencers drifting in with brisk confidence. Their watches cost more than her yearly rent. Their handbags could pay off her mother's hospital bills 5 times over. They walked in without tension in their shoulders, without the weight of survival tightening their spine. Sometimes, she wondered what it felt like to breathe that lightly. But there was no time to dwell. She needed tips today. Her mother's medication refill, another lab test, more bills. Always more bills. By noon, she transitioned to her second job, a cleaning shift at a large fitness club downtown. The difference in worlds was dizzying. Clients lounged in plush robes complaining about exhaustion from their personal Pilates instructor. Sophie scrubbed floors, disinfected equipment, washed towels, each chore methodical, each movement numbing. The fatigue seeped into her bones, but stopping wasn't an option. Her dreams felt far away now. She once imagined studying design, traveling, maybe even opening a small studio. But everything had been put on hold the moment Elena collapsed 3 years ago. Since then, Sophie's world had shrunk to 2 things: work and survival. Sometimes during her brief 10-minute breaks, she'd scroll through photos of places she used to dream of. Paris rooftops, the Amalfi Coast, small art studios, hidden inside European alleyways. But she always locked her phone and went back to work. Reality didn't leave room for fantasies. By the time her shift ended at 8 p.m., her legs trembled from standing. The subway ride home was slow, crowded, and loud. She pressed her forehead against the window, watching the reflection of a woman who looked older than her years, someone fighting battles no one could see. Her mind drifted back to her mother's tattoo. Something about it bothered her today more than usual. There was history in it, secrets her mother carried but refused to speak about. Sophie sensed it was tied to the past. Elena never discussed the part of her life before Sophie was born, before the illnesses, before everything fell apart. She reached home close to 9:30 p.m. Elena was awake, knitting quietly. "You're late," her mother murmured. "Just a long day," Sophie said, shrugging off her coat. As she sat beside her mother, exhaustion tugging at her body, a flicker of frustration surfaced. She loved Elena more than anything. But she was drowning under bills, under fear, under responsibility, under dreams she buried because life demanded it. For one brief moment, a single forbidden thought passed through her mind. When will I get to live my own life? The guilt arrived instantly. Sophie squeezed her mother's hand, forcing the thought away. Her duty was here. Her life, whatever was left of it, belonged to this apartment, this illness, this struggle. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that life wouldn't stay like this forever. Something was coming, something big enough to break everything open. While Sophie was rushing through subway tunnels and scrubbing gym floors, Alexander Hunt was waking up in a completely different universe. His mornings began not with an alarm, but with the gentle hum of a biometric smart system warming the floor of his penthouse, a glass fortress perched above Manhattan's skyline. From the 87th floor, the city looked manageable, almost small, as though the millions of lives below existed in another dimension entirely. Alexander was the kind of man newspapers loved to profile. At 38, he was already a multi-industry billionaire, a force whose decisions could shift markets and reshape corporations overnight. His empire stretched across tech, real estate, clean energy, and private equity. His name opened doors in places most people only saw on magazine covers. But despite his power, the man who stepped into his marble bathroom that morning felt a constant, unspoken emptiness. The kind money never solved. His life looked perfect to outsiders. A string of global properties, a private island in the Caribbean, a fleet of cars worth more than some small towns, and a schedule filled with charity galas, board meetings, and invitations from world leaders. Yet every evening his penthouse was silent, uncomplicatedly silent, empty in a way no fortune could disguise. He stood shirtless before the mirror, brushing a hand over the tattoo on the left side of his ribs. Sharp lines, geometric symmetry, and in the center, a symbol identical to the one inked on Elena's shoulder. Beneath the design, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a date, Q8 16.97. Alexander exhaled slowly. That tattoo was the only piece of his past he couldn't bury, the one thread connecting him to a decision he regretted every single day. He could still remember the first time he saw Elena. Columbia University, 1997. He was 20, brilliant, wealthy, and already marked as the heir to Hunt Enterprises, a dynasty older than he was. Expectations suffocated him daily. Business courses chosen by his father, networking events disguised as social gatherings, a future already mapped out in stone. He lived in a world where everything was scripted. Elena Ruiz was the first person who made him feel unscripted. She was magnetic, bold eyes, an easy laugh, a way of speaking that made you forget the noise around you. She wasn't impressed by his last name, wasn't intimidated by his family's status. She challenged him, teased him, pushed him out of the polished box he'd been raised in. For the first time, Alexander learned what it felt like to choose something for himself. Their relationship grew quickly, intensely. Nights spent studying in Butler Library turned into long walks through the campus lawns, dinners at cheap diners, whispered confessions at midnight. Elena wasn't wealthy, but she had dreams larger than anyone he'd met. Dreams that didn't require money, only courage. One rainy evening, she took him to a small tattoo studio downtown. "It's a promise," she said, showing him a sketch of the geometric symbol. "A promise of what?" he asked. "That no matter what happens, we remember who we were at this moment." They both got the tattoo. They both believed that their worlds, so opposite, could somehow merge. But reality was harsher than romance. Months later, Elena discovered she was pregnant. Alexander was ecstatic at first. He imagined a life outside of his father's rigid expectations, a family of his own choosing. But when he told his father, the reaction was immediate and devastating. "You are not ruining the Hunt legacy over a girl from nowhere," Theodore Hunt had said, voice cold as ice. "Handle it." Those two words destroyed everything. Alexander tried to fight back. He argued, planned, pleaded. But the pressure from his father, from the board, from the carefully constructed empire built around him, became unbearable. He made the worst decision of his life. He told Elena they needed space, that the timing was bad, that he wasn't ready, that they should pause and think. Words he didn't believe but said anyway. Elena left without a fight. 2 weeks later, he received a call that shattered him. A mutual friend informed him that Elena had miscarried. No details, no explanations, just loss. Alexander ran across the city looking for her. He searched her dorm, her classes, the places they used to go. She was gone, vanished. No goodbye, no closure. For months, he lived in a fog, attending classes in body but not in spirit, drowning in guilt he could never speak aloud. His father insisted he move forward, and Alexander eventually complied, burying his emotions under layers of ambition and relentless work. The world applauded his discipline, unaware it came from a place of pain, not strength. He built an empire on the ruins of that heartbreak. Luxury replaced meaning. Success replaced identity. The man he became had everything, yet felt nothing. Every now and then, he traced the tattoo, remembering the girl who made him feel human. A girl he failed. A girl he lost. He never married, never committed. The billionaire with the perfect reputation also carried a quiet rumor. Alexander Hunt doesn't let anyone get close. And it was true. The world saw a king. Only he remembered the boy who once loved a girl from Washington Heights and broke her heart. That morning, as he buttoned his tailored shirt and prepared for another day of negotiations, he felt the old ache again, the one that whispered that somewhere in the massive city below, a chapter of his life remained unfinished. He just didn't know how close he was to finding it again. By early evening, Sophie was already fighting the heavy drag of exhaustion when the floor manager called her over. His tablet was tucked under one arm, his tone sharp, rushed, and indifferent. "You're on the VIP section tonight. No mistakes. These people complain for sport, so keep your head down and don't get emotional." She nodded, though the knot in her stomach tightened. The VIP section wasn't just demanding, it was punishing. It drew the kind of guests who treated staff like furniture and believed courtesy was optional. But refusing the assignment wasn't possible. She needed every hour, every tip, every extra dollar her feet could earn. The Azure room was already alive with chatter. The decor glittered, the lighting dipped low and elegant, and servers moved in perfectly timed steps. Near the center, a cluster of wealthy executives had already begun their nightly display of arrogance. They snapped fingers at servers, laughed too loudly at their own jokes, and let their egos spill across the table like wine. Sophie stepped forward to serve them, bracing herself. Finally, one man muttered without looking at her. "We've been waiting." "Sorry for the delay," she said gently. "Don't apologize. Just move faster." The others laughed. Sophie swallowed the burn in her throat and continued setting their table. A woman in designer heels tapped her glass sharply. "This is lukewarm," she said. "Take it back, and don't bring it back until it's actually cold." Sophie obeyed, ignoring the sting building behind her eyes. She needed this job. She needed the tips. She needed the money for her mother's medication. By the time she returned with the corrected drink, one of the executives intentionally shifted his chair just enough to make her tray wobble. The glasses rattled, but she steadied them. "Careful," he smirked. "Wouldn't want you to lose your whole career tonight." They laughed again. Sophie forced a tiny smile, the kind that hurt more than crying, and backed away. Minutes later, the atmosphere shifted. A quiet tone buzzed through the manager's earpiece, and suddenly the staff straightened their posture, adjusted uniforms, and cleared a path. Sophie didn't need an announcement to know what it meant. The VIP of the VIPs had arrived. Alexander Hunt. He entered with the type of presence that changed the temperature of a room. His stride was controlled, confident, and almost too calm for a man whose face dominated business magazines. He wore a charcoal suit that fit as though tailored onto him seconds before he walked in. No jewelry, no unnecessary accessories, nothing to distract from the aura of authority he carried effortlessly. He didn't smile, didn't acknowledge anyone beyond a brief nod. He simply moved to his reserved spot, a luxurious booth tucked away from the crowd but positioned to see everything. The executives who'd been tormenting Sophie moments ago fell silent. Power recognized power, and Alexander Hunt was the kind no one dared challenge. Sophie's throat tightened. She had served wealthy men before, but this felt entirely different. She'd seen his face in articles, on financial networks, on headlines about groundbreaking investments. He wasn't just rich, he was a category of wealth that separated itself from ordinary people. The manager approached her. "You'll be covering his table," he said. "Be perfect." Her stomach flipped. Fear mixed with fatigue, but she nodded and walked toward the booth, palms damp, mind running faster than her steps. She approached quietly, setting down water with practiced grace. Alexander barely looked up. His eyes flickered toward her, then back to the document on his sleek tablet. Cold, focused, unreachable. "Still or sparkling?" she asked softly. "Still," he replied without emotion. His voice was deep, steady, precise. Sophie poured the water, then turned to step back, until she saw something that froze her in place. As he lifted his arm to adjust the tablet, his sleeve shifted. Just an inch, just enough. The tattoo, her mother's tattoo. Same shape, same design, same date. Her heart stopped, her breath caught. For a second the room blurred, replaced by memories of guiding her mother's trembling hand months ago when Elena struggled to lift a glass. Sophie had seen the tattoo countless times, the geometric lines, the faded ink, the date she'd never been given an explanation for. A date her mother refused to discuss. A date that once brought tears to her eyes. And now it was here, on the ribcage of one of the most powerful men in the country. Sophie's pulse pounded in her ears. This wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be coincidence. This was too specific, too rare, too deeply personal. She stepped back, almost stumbling as she tried to process what she had seen. Was she mistaken? Was it even possible? Why would a billionaire carry the same tattoo as her mother? The same hidden date? The same symbol? She circled the dining area several times, trying to calm her breathing. Every time she glanced in his direction, her chest tightened. Should she say something? Should she stay silent? Could she really approach a man like him with something so outrageous? One wrong word could cost her her job. But walking away from the truth felt impossible. The tattoo wasn't just a mark. It was a link. A question that refused to be ignored. She stared at Alexander from across the room. He had no idea how close his past was standing. And Sophie had no idea how close she was to a truth that would rewrite everything she thought she knew about her mother and herself. Sophie stood at the edge of the VIP section, hands trembling so hard she nearly dropped her tray. She had rehearsed the line in her head a dozen times, but every version felt dangerous. Approaching a man like Alexander Hunt wasn't something workers in her world did. Not unless they wanted to be escorted out with their final paycheck, if they were lucky enough to get one. But the tattoo wouldn't leave her mind. Her mother's voice echoed in her chest. Some things hurt too much to talk about. Tonight, silence felt like betrayal. She inhaled once, sharp, unsteady, and stepped toward his booth. Each step felt heavier than the last. The polished floor seemed longer, the lights brighter, the crowd louder. But as she reached the booth, the noise faded into a distant rush. It was just her and the man who could ruin her life with a single sentence. Alexander didn't look up immediately. He was reviewing another contract, eyes cold, posture immaculate. His indifference made her pulse jump even faster. She cleared her throat. "Sir?" He raised his gaze. Sharp, direct, disarming. "What is it?" he asked, tone low and composed. Her throat tightened. This was it. Her mind screamed to walk away. Employers didn't tolerate staff who made things personal, especially not with someone like him. But she couldn't keep this inside, not when everything in her life had just shifted. Sophie pointed gently at his arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your tattoo. My mother. She has that same tattoo." For a split second, nothing happened. Then Alexander's expression froze, completely. Time slowed. His fingers slipped from the stem of his champagne glass. It hit the table's edge, tipped over, and crashed to the floor. The sound shattered through the elegant silence of the azure room. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Even the music seemed to fade. Sophie flinched, heat rushing to her face as every pair of wealthy eyes locked on them. But Alexander didn't notice the commotion. His focus was glued to her, staring at her as if he were seeing something impossible. "What did you just say?" he whispered. "My mother has that tattoo," she repeated, her voice steadier this time. "Same design, same date." Alexander's breath caught, so subtly that only someone standing inches away would notice. His chest rose too quickly, then stilled. "What's your mother's name?" he asked, though the question sounded strained, like it was forced through a tightening throat. "Elena. Elena Ruiz." He closed his eyes, just for a moment, just long enough for Sophie to see the shock ripple across his face. Her legs weakened. Something was happening, something big, something she had never prepared for. Alexander Hunt was not reacting like a stranger hearing a coincidence. He looked devastated. When his eyes opened again, the coldness was gone. In its place was something raw, something unfamiliar on a man known for being unshakable. "How old are you?" he asked, barely audible. 25. It was a simple answer, but to Alexander it hit like a blow. 25. Her age aligned perfectly with the date on his skin. The date he had etched as a promise, the date that tied him to Elena forever. His jaw clenched as he stared at her, not with suspicion but with painful recognition. Memories flooded him. Elena's smile, her laugh, her courage, the call about the miscarriage, the empty dorm room, the unanswered questions. And now, Sophie. "I need to see her," he said suddenly. "Tonight." The words burst out of him, not a request, not a command, but something in between. Desperate, urgent. Sophie stepped back, startled by the intensity in his voice. "My mother isn't well," she said softly. She can't handle." "I need to see her," he repeated, firmer this time. "Please." The room was still watching, but Alexander didn't care. His polished composure was stripped away. For the first time that night, he looked human. Unshielded, breathless, terrified of a truth he had spent decades trying to bury. Sophie pressed her lips together, torn between fear and something she couldn't name. This was no longer about serving drinks or surviving the night. Something far deeper had opened in front of her, something she didn't know how to contain. "Where is she?" he asked. Sophie swallowed. "Home, Washington Heights." Alexander stood up so quickly the nearby executives recoiled. He didn't look at them. He didn't acknowledge a single person in the room. His entire world had narrowed to one truth. He needed to face Elena Ruiz, and Sophie needed answers she never knew she was missing. The moment Alexander stood from the booth, the executives nearby snapped their attention toward him. Their expressions shifted from interest to full confusion as Sophie followed behind him, hands shaking, face pale. "What's going on?" one of them asked loudly, eyeing Sophie as if she were a problem contaminating their perfect evening. Alexander didn't slow down. "She's leaving with me," he said. The man scoffed. "Since when do you walk out because of a waitress?" That stopped Alexander for half a second. He turned, eyes cold, voice steady, since it became personal. The executives exchanged looks, whispering theories, some mocking, some uneasy. None of them understood the storm building in his chest. None of them knew how much he feared the truth waiting across the city. Sophie hurried after him, pulling at her apron strings. "You don't have to do this. I shouldn't have said anything. I might have misunderstood." "You didn't." His reply cut through her panic. "If the date is the same, I need to see her." Outside, the night air felt too thin. One of Alexander's drivers rushed to open the back door of a sleek black sedan. Sophie hesitated, staring at the expensive leather seats, the tinted windows, the silent power radiating from the vehicle. This wasn't her world. She shouldn't be here. Everything about the moment felt wrong. Alexander stepped in first, waiting. "Please," he said softly, "come with me." Reluctantly, she slid in. The door closed, sealing them into a quiet space that felt far too small for the weight between them. The city lights streaked past the windows as the car pulled out of Midtown. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alexander finally asked, "How long has your mother been ill?" Sophie stared at her hands. "A few years. It got worse last year. I've been working double shifts to keep up with the bills." Her voice wavered. "Some days she can barely stand. Some days she forgets what she was saying halfway through a sentence." Alexander's jaw tightened. "And you're handling this alone? I don't have a choice." His eyes dropped to his lap, guilt spreading like a shadow across his features. She didn't notice. She was too busy trying to keep her voice steady. He asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell someone at work? They would have adjusted your schedule." Sophie gave a weak, humorless laugh. "Adjusted my schedule? I can't even get a manager to let me take a sick day without them accusing me of making excuses." The words hung in the air, reminding both of them how different their worlds were. One lived in a penthouse with a staff and a fleet of cars. The other dragged herself through life praying her mother stayed alive one more week. The imbalance was almost painful. Alexander leaned forward slightly. "Sophie, when you said you're 25. She cut him off, voice trembling. "I don't know what this means. I'm not saying anything beyond the tattoo. I'm not accusing anyone. I don't know anything for sure." Her breathing hitched. She tried to swallow it down, but exhaustion steamrolled over. The weeks of long nights, the fear of losing her mother, the humiliation at work, the shock of the tattoo, all of it collided at once. And she broke. Tears streamed down before she could stop them. She pressed her hands over her face, shoulders shaking. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm tired of pretending everything's okay." Alexander stared at her, helpless, shaken, unsure how to comfort a young woman who might be connected to the deepest regret of his life. "Sophie," he said softly, "I'm here. I'm not walking away." The car continued toward Washington Heights, carrying both of them toward the truth neither knew how to face. The neighborhood felt like a world Alexander had never stepped into. Dim streetlights, narrow walkways, peeling paint on old buildings. His luxury convoy looked almost out of place parked along the curb, engines humming like creatures that didn't belong in such quiet poverty. Sophie walked in front of him, shoulders tense, keys trembling slightly in her hand. She kept glancing back, as if still unsure she should have brought him. Alexander followed silently, his polished shoes crunching softly on the cracked pavement. Every step made his heart beat louder. After 25 years of emptiness, regret, and questions with no answers, this moment pressed down on him with unbearable weight. Sophie paused at the faded green door of the small ground-floor apartment. She whispered, barely audible, "She's not expecting anyone." Alexander swallowed hard. "I understand." When Sophie pushed the door open, the smell of menthol ointment and boiled herbs drifted out. The lights were low. A small TV flickered in the corner, illuminating piles of medical bills on the coffee table. And there, wrapped in a thin blanket, sitting upright on a worn sofa, was Elena. Her hair, once thick and dark, was now streaked with silver. Her face was tired, her body fragile, and her breathing faintly labored. But when she looked up, her eyes, those deep, unforgettable eyes, locked onto Alexander's. For a moment, the world stopped breathing. Elena's lips parted in silent disbelief, her fingers trembling on the blanket. "Alex," she whispered, voice cracking like it had been frozen for decades and was only now thawing. The sound of his name from her mouth was too much. Alexander's knees almost buckled. He took one step forward, then another, until he stood only a meter away from her. "Elena," he breathed, his voice raw. "My God, it's really you." She stared at him like she was looking at a ghost. Her chest rose unsteadily, and she clutched the arm of the sofa. Sophie stood in the corner, wringing her hands, unsure whether to sit or stand or simply disappear. Alexander dropped to his knees in front of Elena. And then the billionaire, the feared, admired, untouchable Alexander Knight, broke. Tears streamed down his face as he took her shaking hands in his. "You're sick," he whispered. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you disappear? I looked everywhere, everywhere for you." Elena's lower lip trembled. "Alex, you weren't supposed to see me like this." "Like what?" he whispered fiercely. "Alive? Real, Elena?" His voice cracked. "You were the only real thing in my life." Her head fell forward, a tear dripping onto their joined hands. For long, painful seconds, they just stayed like that. Two souls crushed by years of silence, but held together by the ghosts of what they once were. Finally, Elena inhaled shakily. "I never wanted to leave you. Never. But I had to." Alexander looked up at her, eyebrows drawn tight. "Why? Why didn't you tell me about Sophie? Why didn't you give me a chance to be there?" Elena closed her eyes, gathering old memories like shards of glass she'd kept buried too long. "You were rising too fast," she whispered. "You had enemies, journalists, investors watching your every move. I was terrified. Terrified they'd destroy you if they found out about me. About the baby." Alexander's face twisted. "So you ran?" "I ran because I heard things," she said softly. "Rumors that your board planned to use your personal life to ruin you. They wanted to portray you as irresponsible, reckless, unfit to lead. I thought, if I told you about the pregnancy, you'd protect us. You'd choose us, and they'd destroy everything you built." Alexander's voice cracked. "You think any of that mattered more than you?" "I didn't want to be the reason they tore you apart," she whispered. "And then, I got scared. I wanted to tell you, but I got sick, and time passed, and then it felt too late." Alexander's breath shook as he cupped her face. "It was never too late for you. Never." Elena finally reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek, like a piece of a past life coming back home. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For every day you were searching, for every night you wondered." He pressed his forehead against her hand, voice broken. "I searched like a madman. Private investigators, old contacts. I checked hospitals, shelters, cities you once mentioned. Nothing, not even a trace. I thought you were dead." Elena closed her eyes as tears streamed down both their faces. "I thought protecting you meant letting go," she said. "But I see now, it only created pain." Sophie cleared her throat softly, unable to hold back her own tears. "Mom?" He didn't know. Elena looked at her daughter, a grown woman now, beautiful and strong, and then back at Alexander. "I tried to raise her the best I could," she said. "Even when the world kept pushing us down, even when I got sick." Alexander turned to Sophie, emotion tightening his chest. "I should have been there," he whispered. "For you. For both of you." Sophie's eyes softened. "We can't change the past." "But I can change now," he said urgently. He turned back to Elena. "You're not staying here. Not like this. I'm getting you the best medical care available. Private doctors, specialists, everything." Elena shook her head weakly. "Alex, that's too much. It's nowhere near enough." His voice carried the full weight of 25 years of regret. "You carried my child. You raised her alone. You suffered alone. Let me fix what I can." Elena's breath wavered, caught between pride and exhaustion. "Alex, I'm tired. The treatments, they're expensive. We've been surviving, but barely." Alexander inhaled sharply. "Then you don't have to survive anymore. Not alone." He stood, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling my medical team. They're coming tonight." Sophie watched him with wide eyes, part awe, part disbelief. Alexander Knight, the billionaire whose name moved markets, was now pacing a cramped apartment, speaking with a trembling voice. But for the first time, he wasn't investing in a company. He was investing in the family he lost. He ended the call, then turned back to them with a quiet, powerful certainty. "Neither of you will ever struggle again," he said. "Not while I'm alive." Elena covered her mouth, sobbing softly, years of fear, guilt, and loneliness finally cracking open. Sophie wrapped her arms around her mother, and Alexander knelt beside them, one hand gently resting on Sophie's back, the other gripping Elena's trembling fingers. For the first time in 25 years, they were together, and none of them were letting go. Despite the promising diagnosis and the fragile hope growing in the hospital suite, Sophie couldn't ignore the question pressing against her ribs. Her entire life had been shaped by uncertainty: late rent notices, medical bills, long nights in diners and laundromats. She had learned early that hope without proof was dangerous. So when a nurse stepped in to check Elena's IV, Sophie gathered her courage and spoke. "I need a DNA test," she said quietly. Before anything else, the words cut through the room like a cold edge. Alexander froze, eyes widening with something between hurt and understanding. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply nodded once, as if he had been expecting this moment. After all, he was a man used to documentation, contracts, verification, truth delivered on paper. "Of course," he said calmly. "You deserve clarity." A team arrived within minutes. Blood samples were taken from Alexander and Sophie. The process was quick, clinical, almost too simple for how much it meant. Sophie sat still as the needle touched her skin. Alexander stood nearby, watching with quiet intensity, as though any reaction from her mattered more than the result itself. Elena reached for her daughter's hand. "Sophie, he wouldn't be here if he wasn't sure." "I know," Sophie whispered, "but I need to be sure too." The samples were rushed to the lab. Alexander used 2 phone calls, only 2, and the hospital moved with a speed Sophie had never witnessed in her entire life. Even so, the waiting felt endless. Hours stretched. Nurses came and went. Elena dozed. Sophie paced. Alexander, usually immovable in power and presence, seemed restless for the first time. His hands tightened around a cup of untouched coffee. His eyes never left the hallway where the technician would appear. Finally, footsteps approached. A lab specialist entered with a sealed envelope, plain, white, unassuming, yet heavy enough to shift 3 lives. He handed it to Sophie. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal, and before she could read a single word, her breath caught. Because Alexander stepped closer, bracing himself like a man standing on the edge of everything he had ever feared. The result lay in her hands. Sophie's hands shook as she unfolded the lab report. The numbers, percentages, and scientific terms blurred before her eyes. Her heart thudded violently against her ribs. This single sheet of paper carried the weight of 25 years of questions, fears, and sacrifices. Her eyes fell on the line that changed everything. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. For a long moment, time seemed to stop. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the envelope, then at Alexander, whose expression had shifted from anxious anticipation to raw, unguarded emotion. "Is this real?" she whispered, voice cracking. Alexander closed his eyes, shaking slightly. His hand went to his chest, as if he needed to feel his heart racing in confirmation. "It's real," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "Sophie, I'm your father." Sophie collapsed into Elena's arms, tears streaming freely. The tension, the exhaustion, the years of uncertainty, all of it poured out in one unrelenting wave. Elena held her daughter tightly, sobbing herself, relief washing over her like a tidal wave. Alexander stepped closer, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a billionaire among people. He felt like a father. He crouched slightly, reaching for Sophie's hands. "You don't have to face anything alone ever again. Not medical bills, not school, not life." He paused, swallowing the guilt that had shadowed him for decades. "I will support you both, fully, emotionally, financially, everything you need." His voice wavered with the gravity of the promise. Elena looked at him with tear-streaked cheeks. "Alex, it's too much." "No," Alexander said firmly. "It's what should have happened years ago. I'm making sure nothing like this happens again." He listed what he would provide: full medical coverage for Elena, ensuring her recovery would be complete and uncompromised. A new apartment for Sophie and her mother, comfortable and secure. Funding for Sophie's education, so she could finally follow the dreams she had sacrificed, and a future inheritance. A symbol of both security and acknowledgement of the family he had failed to protect. But more than money, he offered something deeper. A chance to rebuild a father-daughter relationship, to heal wounds long left unattended, and to create a family that had existed only in fragments for 25 years. Sophie's hands tightened around his. She looked up at him, seeing not just the billionaire she had glimpsed from afar in the azure room, but the man whose past mistakes had shaped her life, now standing determined to make them right. Elena stepped back, watching the two of them, her chest swelling with cautious hope. She could see the shift, the protective father, the daughter finally recognized, and a family beginning to exist in full. Alexander wrapped an arm around Sophie, resting his forehead lightly against hers. "We have a lot to catch up on," he whispered, "and I'll be here for every second of it." Sophie nodded, the weight of 25 years lifting slightly. She realized this was not just the start of recovery for her mother. It was the start of a new life, one defined by love, acknowledgement, and belonging. For the first time in decades, Alexander felt whole, Sophie felt seen, and Elena felt safe. Together, they were no longer fractured. They were family. 1 year had passed since that fateful night in the azure room, yet the memory still lingered like a delicate, unbreakable thread weaving them together. Elena moved with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The treatments had worked. Her energy returned, and with it, the confidence to embrace life, rather than merely endure it. The small apartment they had left behind now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a bright, spacious home that reflected the care Alexander insisted upon. Sophie, no longer weighed down by double shifts and financial worry, attended college full-time. Her laughter, once rare, buried under exhaustion, now rang freely through the halls of her new life. She studied hard, but also allowed herself moments of joy, moments she hadn't permitted herself for so long. And every week, she visited Alexander's office in the heart of Manhattan. The building still gleamed with power and influence, but for Sophie it had transformed into something profoundly personal. No longer a world apart, it was now a place where she belonged. Alexander introduced her to colleagues, partners, and friends, not as an afterthought, not as someone connected by coincidence, but proudly, undeniably, as his daughter. There was no hesitation, no fear of judgment, only acknowledgement and pride. The bond between them grew steadily. Boardroom discussions and high-stakes meetings still demanded Alexander's focus, but he found himself pausing to check on Sophie's day, to celebrate small victories, to listen with genuine interest to her plans and dreams. Elena often watched the two of them together, her eyes reflecting both relief and quiet joy. Secrets that had once weighed a lifetime of pain were now transformed into the foundation of a family rebuilt from truth, love, and unwavering commitment. Sophie's laughter filled their home, Alexander's guidance anchored her steps, and Elena's health gave them all the courage to face the future unafraid. From a shattered past filled with absence and regret, they had forged a family resilient enough to endure, strong enough to thrive, and filled with the kind of love that only truth and reunion could create. For the first time in decades, they were no longer fractured. They were complete. Now that you've witnessed Sophie's life transform, the question remains, what would you have done in her shoes? Would you confront the truth after decades of uncertainty, or let the past stay buried? And when faced with someone who holds the power to change your life, could you trust them fully, or would caution win over hope? Do you believe in second chances? Could a family torn apart by mistakes and secrets ever truly rebuild? Or are some bridges too far gone? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below telling us what you would do and the country you're watching from. We're curious how this story resonates around the world. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that takes you inside the lives of the world's wealthiest and most fascinating people. And remember, this is just the beginning. Our next billionaire story will reveal a shocking secret that changes everything for one man at the top of the financial world, and you'll want to be the first to see it. Stay tuned, because the world of wealth, power, and hidden family ties is far from over.